So our speaker for tonight is Bob Hoffman, K4CQO. Do you have a certain phonetic that you use with that?
Yeah, I use Charlie Queen Ocean's one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
the fun one.
unique.
Charlie Queen Ocean, yeah.
So Bob originally is from Wisconsin, and after college he went to work at Bell Labs now. Is that the one in New Jersey where the transistor was created? Invented?
One in Naperville.
Okay. All right. Because I visited the one in New Jersey. That was really cool. From there he moved to Florida, South Florida, worked for Siemens, which also gave him the opportunity to work in Munich for 8 years. That'd be a real interest in me, see how that happened. Cool city. After several other moves, he settled in Georgia, where he is now retired as of this past January. Most of his background is in telecommunications, defining the requirements for systems, and lastly, he did the same thing for prepaid gift cards. And don't worry about him, but I'll stand a little further away. He holds a black belt in Shotokan Karate. He was first licensed as a technician class in the 60s and let it expire. He was following in his father's footsteps, whose call sign was W9CQO. 50 years later, he decided to get back into ham radio, good move, and was grandfathered into a general license in 2018, and then he upgraded to his extra about 3 months later. He works with the Georgia DMR group and net founder Jeff Hochberg, W4JEW, to maintain the Georgia DMR group's I/O, Telegram Georgia DMR, and Wednesday evening DMR net. And now, here's Bob.
All right, so what is digital mobile radio? All right, what it does is it changes your voice and tones into a digital stream. All right, now I'm going to go through exactly how that works. The digital signals carry your voice without static, which is the same thing that happens with Fusion or D-Star. So it doesn't have static or noise. So digital has a definite improvement over analog for getting a clear voice signal over your, over distance. Digital signals tend to go a little bit longer. Because they can be understood further. All right, and all right, and you see David shaking his head no. But DMR generally uses UHF and VHF frequencies. This is a chart that shows the audio quality, and you see the blue line is the digital reception that you can get, and it goes a lot further over for good, excellent audio quality than an analog does. So it has some advantages. Now, exactly how far that is, that I can answer. All right, so how does the DMR signal work? What DMR does is it looks at the analog signal and samples it. So it takes a check of it. I guess you can see this. These are the spots where it's measuring, and it has faster sample time, picture sample time, that it looks to see what the signal is. And as the sample time gets less, you have less of a chance of picking up the actual audio signal. And the rule of thumb is you have to sample twice the audio frequency rate in order to be able to reproduce the audio frequency. Because if you would do it less than half, you could sample here, and then sample there, and you would never see the up and out of the signal. So you have to be able to sample twice the rate in order to reproduce the signal. The DMR uses what's called a vocoder. The vocoder, what it does is it samples the signals, samples the audio signal. It collects them, and then it does digital compression on it. Well, it's something like a zip file. So it takes a 30 millisecond worth of audio, compresses it, and then compresses it down into a digital stream that is then sent over. All right, it's the same kind of compression and decompression of the audio into digital and back that Fusion and D-Star uses. It's the same mechanism. What it does is it samples at an 8 kilohertz rate. That means that you are able to get a 4 kilohertz audio signal. That's the same audio that is done on your analog phone lines. It does noise, it has built-in noise cancellation, and it does a compression of 30 milliseconds into 216 bits of information. This is what the signal looks like. It's the payload. And what they do is they split the payload into 2 parts and put the signaling information in the middle. Don't know why they do that. Analog Analog is just a straight path. What DMR uses is time division multiplexing. What it means is it takes the signal and it splits it up into 2 pieces. They call it time slot 1 and time slot 2. And it sends the first time slot, then it sends the second time slot, it goes back to the first time slot, and so on. Both of these time slots, slot 1 and 2, are both contain 30 milliseconds worth of information. So both time slots are sent within 30 milliseconds. And then it's reproduced on the other side, and they split them up, and you now have 2 different voice channels. Right, DMR protocol. DMR has what they call 3 tiers. And I'm going to try to explain what the tiers are. They have tier 1 and 2 are used by ham radios, and tier 1 is used for the communication between radios, between 2 handhelds. Tier 2 goes from your handheld to a repeater. And then tier 3 is between repeaters, or between the repeater and your network server, which provides all the information. All right, I'll take a break. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yes.
You mentioned that there was no difference in how the analyzed signal is digitized. Okay.
You mentioned there was really no difference in the way that the analog signal is digitized. The algorithm is used between DMR, D-Star, and Fusion.
That's my understanding, yes. They use the same vocoder, which is a registered way of compressing the digital signal, doing the sampling, compressing the digital signal, and then setting it off.
So one question, I guess I've been
Modulation is different.
modulations there. What I'm getting at is I've heard there's like a wide and a narrow on Fusion, and that the narrow allows you to send text and pictures along with the audio, and the wide uses all of the bandwidth for audio. I was just curious how that jives with the compression algorithm.
Well, the compression, the vocoder is only for voice. Right, so exactly how the other stuff is handled in Fusion or whatever, I have no idea.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious about that.
May help a little. On Fusion, they do actually have different compression levels. They have the narrow band and a wider band, and when it's wider, it takes more bits per second to transmit. What the differences are also is the modulation technique. And the first of all, TDMA is only used in DMR. In Fusion and D-Star, it is just the signal is sent. When you get the button down, it's continually sending your voice and it's not breaking it up into time slots. Also, the modulation, so the carrier, the way they push the signal onto the carrier is, the PSK type of signals. There are many, many varieties of that, and that's where the difference is.
Okay, that's all good. Thank you.
All right, talk groups, what are they? Talk groups are defined by what we call network servers. Those are the beasts or the entities that provide the DMR signal. And there are, well, I have 5 of them listed here, but there are probably more. These are the entities that hold your voice and hold your signals, and then retransmit it back to you. So they're, think of them like, when I think of the, well, I should say the bottom here, the K4USD is what most of the repeaters in Georgia are connected to. Most of the hotspots use Brandmeister, or can use Brandmeister. They can actually connect to many of the servers. Some of the repeaters in Georgia are also Brandmeister. What talk groups do is they really represent their, I mean, you can think of them as a room to go to talk to things that have a particular interest. Most of the DMR talk groups are defined by area. They have an area that is, let's say, Atlanta Metro. You also have an area that is Georgia State. And you would go to those when you want to hear other people who are also in Georgia or want to talk about things that are within Georgia. So if you want to find out what's the traffic in Georgia Metro or Atlanta Metro, you would go to the Atlanta Metro talk group. Now, the talk, yeah, go ahead.
So I'll speak loud. So this is, I'm new to it. This is what completely mangles in my mind. So
For talking groups, can I just go ahead and punch in any number I want and it's going to open up that talk group on the fly, or do I need to guess and land on the talk group that's pre-existing on the network I'm operating, which I don't know which it is?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
I think this is the,
Yeah, the talk
kind of
group.
like the track.
Yeah, well, the talk group is the talk groups are numbered. And what the network servers or people got around to an agreement of what these numbers represent. Like Georgia is 3113, right? The worldwide is talk group 91, and these are Brandmeister numbers. There is, the talk group doesn't mean that someone who's not in Georgia, if they want to connect it, can still talk to this, can still connect to this talk group that's in Georgia State. Right? So that's just the way it works. You think of it as an organization or a way to talk to like-minded people.
Right, but if I want to talk to someone, I need to land on a number talk group that already exists. If you look at all numbers,
Yeah.
there's huge gaps between the different talk groups. There's empty spots that are unused.
True.
So if I dial in a talk group that exists, I'll land there. If I dial a number that's not pre-declared on the network, where does my transmission go? To Oblivion or?
Right there, it kind of, I mean, this is getting into really specifics of how.
And let's keep it to the end.
Well,
For next
yeah,
week.
I don't address that, so I guess I can talk about it now. Talk groups, there are certain servers that will allow you to enter any old number. And if someone else goes to that particular server and types in the same number, they can talk to you together, right? And generally, that number is not supported by repeaters, because generally repeaters have within their database, you know, maybe 20, maybe 50 total talk groups, not the whole list. So I guess to answer your question is, yes, it's possible to type in any old number, but you'd have to coordinate it with someone else. And its chances of the repeater supporting that is small. Although if you go to one of the servers directly, let's say through a hotspot, you could potentially do that.
Talk group is like a party line, basically.
Right, exactly.
So I understand fairly well the concept. If I'm trying to dial into a repeater, how do I know which talk groups are supported by that DMR repeater?
Go on to the website, look it up.
All right, so it's wonderful for info.
Yeah, every repeater has its own, ones that they support. And there's also, which I'll get to a little bit, static talk groups and PTC talk groups. And there's definitely a difference between the two.
So if I key up a repeater requesting a Georgia talk group, does it bring up all of the repeaters in Georgia that are listening to that talk group and broadcast my signal across all of those repeaters at the same time?
Yeah. Anybody who is listening to that talk group will hear that talk.
Trying to work out the differences between that and D-Star. So, okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, there's no restrictions on who can subscribe or who can connect to a particular talk group. Like for example, a guy in Minnesota can connect and talk to the talk group in Georgia.
Does it take pre-registration like D-Star?
No, not at all. Well, you have to register your DMR identifier, but once that's done, that gives you access to the entire DMR network. And there's nothing further that you have to, register with.
So normally the owner of the repeaters will put out a directory of what talk groups they support?
They should have on their website, but apparently some of them say, I am a K4USD repeater. And you can look on the K4USD site and see all the talk groups that are supported by it. Also in those talk groups, they list the usually the call code, although the color code, which is like your tone for accessing the repeater. That's specific to the repeater. If you look at the K4USD, they also specify the time slot. Remember, we have 2 time slots, and you can have a talk group on one of the time slots and something else on the other time slot. And the repeater specifies exactly which time slot the talk group will reside on. And you can't access it if you try to key up your radio on the other time slot for that talk group, it won't work. Right, so here's some talk group generations. Local Metro, like Atlanta Metro, you can find it on Brandmeister Talk Group 9 or 31131. Right, 9 is a local area. So presumably every repeater could potentially have a talk group 9, and that would be its local area. While 3113 is specifically Atlanta Metro. Statewide, Grandmaster S3113. This is just to give you an idea of what the talk groups are. Southeast Georgia, they have 1 to 5, or Southeast area, which is the states that are listed on that figure. That's a talk group. And then there's worldwide, and it's worldwide English. There are also some other languages that they specify. And that's talk group 91. Right, now, the tricky part is not all network servers support the same numbers. They should, but they don't always. In other words, some of the Grandmeister can have its set of numbers, like 3113 in each Georgia. It's possible that some of the other network servers that provide DMR, 3113 may not be existing at all, or they could have a totally different number representing Georgia State. So there's some things that are not always so nice about it. Some of the talk groups are shared between various servers, like the Georgia State, K4USD, the one that most of the Georgia repeaters are on. That talk group, 3113, is shared with Brandmeister, which is nice because then if someone connects in Georgia to a repeater, you can most likely hear it on your hotspot if you have it connected to Brandmeister. And they're both talking on 3113 in the same talk group. But they're not guaranteed to be the same. They're not always guaranteed to be talking to each other. Talk groups use a protocol which is called UDP, which is a user datagram protocol. It's the same kind of protocol that's used when you use streaming on your TV. That you tune to it, and whatever this thing is putting out, you receive it. That's what happens with DMR. Whatever's being sent on that talk group is you receive. Now it's also for DMR, it's 2 ways, so you can also talk on it. But your talking and receiving is all done through a network server. So you have what I'm calling a subscription. So you subscribe or you connect, you ask to connect to that talk group, and then you get the information from that talk group. So like I said here, the client requests it to the server, and then the server responds with the talk group information of the traffic. Right, there's also a, so the stream is set, and there's no, it's not like a Like when you have an IP or TCP connection, which is PC to PC, this is distributed to everybody. There's no, it's not a connection to a particular radio. Everybody who's, where that talk group is there will receive that information. Right, now there's two types of talk group selections. There's static, and then there's part-time, PTT. It's not push-to-talk. It's a part-time talk group. What it means, static means, is that when there's traffic, that traffic will be transmitted. For example, some of the repeaters in Georgia will have 3113 as a static talk group. That means that anybody who keys up on, if you're listening, you can listen to that talk group, and when traffic appears on it, it will be sent out by the repeater. The part-time means that you have to do a subscription. In other words, you have to say, I want to receive the traffic. If you don't do, I want to receive the traffic, you will never receive it. And the ones that are static are all up to the repeater owner. So in general, and this isn't always true, this is what I found, is that repeaters have a local and state talk groups as static. And in a hotspot, you can set up your static group talk groups by configurations. It's usually a configuration on your hotspot, or you go to the server like Grandmeister and set up the talk groups that you want to have static, which means you will always get traffic for them, and you don't have to key it or ask them to subscribe. The asking of subscribing usually has a timeout associated with it. It can be anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 minutes. So if you do a subscription to a part-time talk group, you will hear traffic, and if you don't do anything, it will disappear after 15 minutes. Unless someone else is using it. Because if you're a repeater, everybody who's on that repeater will be hearing that same talk group. So someone else could key in, and that will restart the timers. Yep. Am I too far away? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm backing up. Right. Okay, sorry about that. I'll stay close. All right. Okay, static talk groups are assigned to a time slot. Okay. All radios receive, like I said, all the radios receive the same traffic on the talk group. Okay. So it's not radio specific. It's not a radio to repeater connection. Very similar to analog. When you're connected to the repeater, you hear anybody else that's talking on that same repeater. Now, radios normally have a light on them that shows that they're receiving traffic. That light can show that you're receiving traffic. That doesn't mean that your radio is tuned to that talk group. It also doesn't mean that your radio is tuned to the talk group at time slot. So the light will blink, and you can see that it looks like I'm seeing traffic, but you may not hear anything because your radio may not be tuned to the talk group to listen to it.
You need that?
Let me check that.
You're receiving traffic.
It's your daughter calling.
No, it's not. It's
Your auto warranty's about to expire.
No, not at all. Sorry about that.
Your phone's warranty is about to expire.
All right, so I'm back. All right, so that light could be lighting up, but you may or may not see the traffic, even though your radio is receiving information from the repeater or whoever you're connected to, but you may not hear anything because your radio may not be tuned to it. Every radio you have to tune to the talk group in order to hear it. In other words, you can be receiving the same frequency on, to the repeater, but the repeater could be sending it on talk group 4 and you're listening on talk group 10, and your radio will not give you that information. All right, like talk group switching.
Question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know I've only had my license for a few days, but I just, as someone who just set this up, something that really helped me, putting my radio in promiscuous mode, or the G monitor is, it's called on my mini-tone. Basically that makes it where no matter what talk group or time slot you're receiving traffic for, it'll play it back. And it'll also show you what time slot and color code and group it is. Very helpful for figuring out what your problem is. That really helped me.
Okay, that's very true. If you want to just hear the traffic that's going on, which is good because it came up with this slide. What this slide says is, in order to switch to a different talk group, if you're hearing one, there has to be a gap of no traffic. Because generally, when the traffic is coming to you, it doesn't allow you to send a signal out. So if your repeater or what it's sending is getting traffic to you, you're not able to interrupt it to say, I want to listen to a different talk group. It has to be a blank, a time when there's no traffic coming at you in order to do the partial initiation or the subscription to a different talk group. So promiscuous has its uses, but there are some risks because you may not be able to interrupt it to go to the talk group that you want. All right, so talk groups are also assigned to, or the PTT, part-time talk groups are also assigned by a repeater. So the repeater will tell you which one of the talk groups it supports. And repeaters don't support all of them. All right. And they'll tell you which time slot you have to go to in order to receive the traffic. The PTT connections have a time limit, again, so once you subscribe to it, you can do it. Generally, like the Grandmeister has a 10-minute timer on it. So when you start listening to traffic, if there's no other signals to I want to listen to it again or subscribe to it longer, it'll disappear after 10 minutes. It's a way to adjust the amount of traffic that's going on in the network. And when you do there's also, depending on the server, when you do a part-time, you do a selection or a subscription to a talk group, there is usually or there can be a timeout to say that for, let's say, for 5 minutes, no one else can take this talk group away, right? So it saves it so that someone else can't come in and switch it away from you immediately. All right, so that there are some, timing controls that are built into the servers.
Question.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about the timeout and take it away, does it mean that my connection to that talk group will completely disappear? Or it's just a matter of, because there's no traffic, the system will just put me kind of in a standby mode until there is traffic for me to either answer to or to listen to.
DMR is always a subscription. All right, so after 10 minutes or whatever the timeout is, that subscription ends if it's not permanent. Static means it's permanent and there's no timeout. So if you do a part-time talk group, it's set up so that this will be subscribed to for a certain amount of time. And after that, it'll disconnect that subscription.
Okay, so
So
then
does that answer your question? Or?
so that means it have to be, for that specific talk group that is part-time, it have to be reinstated again.
Right, you would have, in other words, if you're listening to it, and let's say it's got a 10-minute timeout, if you subscribe to it again in 5 minutes, then the timer resets itself.
Oh, okay.
Right.
If I can interject here just briefly. Think of it as like a scanner. You got a scanner that's scanning through frequencies, and all of a sudden it picks up something and it locks on that. And the thing is, once it locks on that, even though the communication on that different frequencies stops, it'll stay there for a certain set of time before it starts cycling through all of it. Same thing happens with DMR. You subscribe to, say, 2 or 3 talk groups, and one of them starts talking, and you're locked in on that. After a certain period of time, it will go back into scanning mode and allow one of the other talk groups to interject. Now, if you want to get back to a talk group that you were on and suddenly switch to another one, you wait for a break in it, and you chunk, as they say in the business, and you'll sync your hotspot back to that channel, and it will drop the other one that it had scanned on it, so you're forcing your hotspot to sync. So think of it as a scanner and all the things that come with that.
Yeah, to add with that, when you're talking to a repeater, you're not the only one talking to a repeater, so someone else can subscribe to a different talk group. So that's the way the stuff is shared.
Okay. Every time you push to talk, you reset the clock, right?
Yeah, every time you hit the PTT, that is a subscription request for that talk group that you're on.
To extend the
That's
timer.
right.
So if you just listen, you will time out eventually. But if you speak within the 5-minute interval, the communication will last longer.
That's correct. He asked if you just sit there, will it time out? And yes, it will.
It's
And you
for the
need
benefit
to.
of the folks on Zoom, because they can't hear without the microphone.
Yeah. So what he was asking is what happens when you do one of these part-time talk groups. The traffic will disappear after a certain amount of time, unless you hit the push to talk, which is a subscription to the talk group that your push to talk or your radio is to. Provided that talk group is, or that time slot is free. All right, so there are also controls built into the radio that allows or sets up the friendliness of the radio of when it can connect to a talk group. There are, I list some of these options that are done here, and it kind of depends, the names of how they're referenced, depends on the handset or the radio manufacturer and what they call it. And generally, there is, to transmit only if both time slots are free. There's an option to say only if the particular time slot is free. And then there's one, if there's any traffic for a different, what they say, a different color code. That's potentially if you have different repeaters that are using the same frequency. And then there's a transmit without restrictions, and that's usually called the impolite mode because you interrupt anybody who's potentially on there. Because when you transmit, you could potentially be interfering with the repeater transmitting and mess up people that are close to you if they're also receiving the same signal or on the same frequency. All right, repeater versus hotspot. All right, the repeater uses 2 time slots, always. It only allows talk groups that it wants to support. In other words, the repeater is the commander to say what's available that it's going to support. And it also says which network server it's going to use. And there's only one network server that a repeater can support. It also specifies the time slot that the talk group is assigned to. For a hotspot, there are actually 2 different types of hotspots, but generally you can connect directly to network servers. You can choose the network server you want to connect to, and depending on the hotspot, you can actually have it connected to different servers depending on the talk group that you want to talk to. That gets pretty complicated, but it's possible to do it. You can access the talk group. You can tell it which network server you want to connect to. You can connect it to, as long as that server is supported and allow the hotspot to connect to it. As far as I know, K4USB does not support that. Grandmeister, DMR Plus, Free DMR all support connections from hotspots. Right? So, two versions of hotspots. They call them Simplex and Duplex. Simplex has multiple meanings. When you're talking about DMR, Simplex DMR connection, it usually or can mean radio to radio. It can also mean that it is a Simplex hotspot. Simplex hotspot only has a single antenna, and it only uses time slot 2. So you only have a single time slot for a Simplex hotspot. Duplex, and there's a figure there to show it only uses time slot 2 and time slot 1 just isn't used. Then there's a duplex hotspot. It has 2 antennas, that's why you can tell the difference, and it uses both hot slots. And you can, some of the advantages of having 2 time slots is you can have one that's set up with static traffic, and you always have another time slot that you can talk to go to another talk group. So it gives you more flexibility. All right, last thing, customer programming software. That's the thing, go ahead, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, I have a question on the hotspot, the difference between the hotspot and the repeater. So you can have a DMR radio connected to a repeater to be able to communicate with whichever talk group is available to that repeater.
Yes.
But then, if you have a hotspot, that hotspot will communicate with whichever talk group is available to that hotspot.
It's available on the server. In other words, like Grandmeister has, 1,500 different talk groups. And your hotspot, if it's connected to a Grandmeister server, has access to all 1,500 of those talk groups that you can connect to.
Okay, so the hotspot will, in order for me to understand, so the hotspot will give me access to a system, if I can call it that way, within the internet type of deal, or a computer type of system?
Well, I've been calling them network servers. It's a thing that provides the DMR traffic.
Into that specific network?
Yeah.
But any radio can connect to a hotspot?
Well, the hotspots have very low power. They're like 100 milliwatts maybe. So generally it's in your house and you use it for communication within your house.
Okay, and my last question is, will a computer could work as a hotspot, or you need a specific device like a router connect to the internet in order to connect to that network through the...
Hotspots are generally, at least the ones, they have a processor built into it. A lot of them are built on Raspberry Pis, and they run on something called Pi Star, and that has another board that's on top of the Raspberry Pi that provides the RF connection to it. So the RF connection goes to this hotspot, and then the hotspot then connects to the internet. So yes, you need an internet connection in order to get to the server.
Okay, so, but any radio can operate through a hotspot? Any DMR radio, let me put it this way.
I would say yes. Yeah. Every hotspot still has to have the frequency and channels defined and so on that's needed, just like a repeater does. Some people refer to duplex hotspots as a mini repeater, just because the idea that it has 2 time slots, and which is what a repeater does.
Again, to use an analogy here to simplify this thing, The difference between a hotspot and a repeater is basically a hotspot is a repeater on your desktop. Otherwise, the radio can connect to a repeater that sits up on the top of a bank building, for instance, and is pre-configured because nobody's sitting up there playing around with it. Or you can connect to your hotspot sitting on your desk, and the luxury you have of that is not only are you able to play with it directly, but you can configure it to whatever talk groups you want. So but otherwise, the mechanism for connecting to either one is the same.
Yeah, one of the uses of this impolite mode, which says I'm going to transmit no matter what, can be done with a hotspot because you're the only one that's using it.
The hotspot's also a lot more portable because you can drag it around wherever you can connect to the internet.
The hotspot's also a hell of a lot more portable than the fixed repeater situations.
I've had mine with swing arm bag on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Had mine with swing arm and made contacts off the top of a mountain. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fun. A lot of fun to be had.
Okay, so this is sort of an introduction about what we'll do next week on the workshop. These are the steps that you would go through in order to get your radio programmed. And the CPS is what they, everybody calls it. CPS is a program that is dedicated to the type of radio that you have. Anytone, TYT, Radiosity, they all, Motorola, all have their own CPS type. Okay. And it only works as far, I'm not aware of any general program that allows you to program a DMR radio that was not made by the manufacturer. Could be they're out there, but I'm not aware of them. So the steps that you have to go through in order to program your radio. The first thing you do is you get a DMR ID and you give it your name and call sign. All right, that's put into the radio. All right, then you create a list of talk groups, right, that you want to be able to connect to. And these are just numbers. All right, so it's 3113, 91, any other type of number that is used by the server that you're going to connect to. Right? Then you create channels. Now what are channels? Channels are the RF connection to either the repeater or the hotspot. And the channel contains, it contains the talk group that you want to talk to, the time slot it's on, there's a lot of default stuff in there. It says whether it's digital or analog. Most of the DMR radios also support analog. So you also can program your analog channels in here also. And they're also called channels, which is a connection to a repeater or a connection to whatever RF connection. All right, then you create zones. Zones is like a packaging of channels. Just to give you an example, what I use is I have the talk groups that I use with my hotspot. That's considered in a zone, right? Every repeater that I have access to and the talk groups that are supported by that repeater is in a different zone. So I use the zones to designate the thing you want to connect to and the grouping of talk groups that are available on that repeater. Essentially, a zone is just a grouping, and you can use it however you want. It's really just to say, I want to collect these talk groups or connections and I want to put them together. Then you can customize the buttons and tones and so on your program. And when you're all done, you write the code plug, which is what all of these programming things are called, code plug. You transfer that over to your radio. And that's different from firmware. Firmware on the radio is what the radio uses in order to operate. But the code plug is considered a configuration of the types of talk groups and how you want to connect. Okay. And then you write to the radio. Right. You should always save it before you write it. You don't want to lose all the stuff forward that you did. All right. right, so the radio, this is just the rough thing about what the radio has. It has your DMR ID and a call sign. It has the talk group list. Then you put in the channels, and you assign the channels to zones. And finally, you load the digital contacts. The digital contacts are, one thing that DMR provides is it provides a database of all the other DMR contacts. And it can be worldwide or it can be minimalized depending on how many digital contacts your radio holds. There are over 200,000 DMR IDs that are already in existence. So what that means is that when your radio sees a connection coming in, somebody's talking on the talk group, the DMR sends the radio ID, it does not send a call sign. So what the radio does is it looks up within its database and looks up the call sign associated with it and displays the call sign, and can also display the person's name and location, depending on what you have in your radio. So it's a nice feature because you actually see who's calling. That does bring up one point though, that even though the DMR identifies you, it only identifies you by your DMR ID, which is not FCC compatible. So you should, when you key in, announce yourself with your call sign to say who you are. Right. All right, each talk group between the radio and the repeater hotspot, it requires a channel. So this talks about channels. The channel is information, and you define per channel the transmit and receive frequency, the color code, which is a tone, which is equivalent to the analog tone for access to it. And there are, and I may get this wrong, I think there are, I know there's more than 10. I don't remember the exact number. There's a bunch of, but there's less than 20, I believe, color codes.
Probably 16.
16? Okay, all right, there's 16 color codes. And then there's access, which is your, this is your transmit. In other words, do you transmit all the time, or do you wait for a free channel before you transmit? The talk group has to be assigned, and then the time slot. All this information is included in the channel that is defined. It also means that for every talk group, you need all this information input. And if you have the same input going into a different repeater, you need the same input done for a different repeater. But it's possible to copy stuff. Most CPSs allow you to copy the information. So it's not as hard as manually putting it in every time. But this is the channel information, so there's time slot 1 and 2, and there's a transmit and a receive frequency. And what I do is I put all the information going to a single repeater in a single zone. All right, each repeater, if you go to the repeater, it should list, or you should be able to find out which talk groups are supported. The static talk groups, the static ones are the ones that if there's traffic on it, it'll be received, and you don't have to do the subscription. It's automatically subscribed all the time. The color code, all right, which is Yoga 15, all right. I guess I had it in there. The transmit and receive frequency. And just a note on this, which is something I've done when I had my hotspot. It talks about the hotspot transmit and receive, and I put the radio transmit and receive the same as what the hotspot said, transmit and receive, but you have to reverse them because the radio transmit has to be on the hotspot receive and vice versa. So it's just something to look for. So the hotspot is configured with the color code, transmit and receive frequencies, very much like the channel, although it doesn't need a per talk group information embedded in the hotspot. The hotspot doesn't care about talk groups. In other words, you don't configure your hotspot for talk groups. The talk group's supported by the hotspot connection, which is done by the server. The server controls the talk groups that it supports. And the server doesn't care about the time slot either. Okay, so if it's a duplex, it supports time slot 1 and 2, and simplex, it only supports time slot 2. And that's it. I'm done. After a slow start. All right, so does anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you. Yes?
How old is the technology?
Hang on.
My question is, how old is the technology? I mean, the codec, the first overall implementation is that like year 2000-ish? The DMR, how old is it?
I don't know that.
It's close to 2000. It's about the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
Where do you get your ID from?
There's,
Is it radioid.net?
yes, that sounds right.
Okay, yeah, that's where you go. There's something on there to sign up to get an ID. What's your ID?
I don't know. But I mean, I guess to go along with that, if you have a radio ID, it's assigned to your call sign, right? So if you have multiple HTs, you can put the same radio ID and call sign in both HTs. You don't need different radio IDs for each unit. Okay, good, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. Round of applause, everybody.